Yeah, cool. Thank you. Nate, please.
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. Certainly happy to be here. You probably already know that in July of 2020, Governor Charlie Baker signed legislation making June 19th an official state holiday. What you may not know is that 13 years earlier, the state's only Black governor, Deval Patrick, signed the first proclamation commemorating Juneteenth in Massachusetts. This holiday commemorates the day in 1865 when the last slaves who were held in Galveston, Texas, learned of their freedom, which was 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm honored to be participating in NSCC's Juneteenth celebration and commend the work that was undertaken by this college this past academic year. There have been a number of groups and committees who have done important work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these groups include the Diversity Leadership Council, the Equity and Inclusion Collaborative, the Anti-Racism Working Group, the Leading for Change, the National Coalition Building Institute, and the Forum on Tolerance. These groups have addressed head-on topics such as implicit bias, Black Lives Matter, police reform, anti-racism, and microaggressions, to name a few. And I applaud all of them on their tenacity to have these uncomfortable conversations with the campus community. Senior leadership in the campus community as a whole should also be commended for their steadfastness in advocating for our inaugural Chief Diversity Officer, who will be coming on board in July. So with the aftermath of the George Floyd killing and then the conviction of former police officer Derek Chauvin, this college really has rallied around this and other incidents that happened and still happen to this day to no longer remain silent, but to speak out on the injustices. So I want to applaud all of you for your work in this effort. And I just want to end with one of my favorite quotes from James Baldwin, who is a novelist, a playwright, a poet, an activist. And he says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So again, I thank you for allowing me to participate in NSCC's Juneteenth celebration, and I look forward to the conversation and the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, President Nate. Okay, welcome everyone once again. This is going to be an enjoyable ride. I am going to ask everyone if you can just keep your microphones muted, please, since we're recording, just to limit the background noises and disruption. Okay, so next up is going to be Ajo, who's going to do a brief summary reading on the Juneteenth flag and its symbols and its meaning.
I will share this one. So very briefly, this is the Juneteenth flag. It was very recently created back in 1997 by a Bostonian, Ben Haith. He is actually a Roxbury community activist and created this flag. Then in 1997, it was redesigned by 4 other Bostonian designers, all working together to create this new iteration. And then yet again in 2007, the type June 19th, 1865 was added as well. The symbolism in the flag is this star represents Texas and being the Lone Star State, as also represents the freedom of all African Americans in all 50 states. This burst, as is called, represents a nova, like a new star, and it represents a new beginning. And then we've got this horizon in the background, which represents opportunities and promises that are to come and that lay ahead, right? The colors, red, white, and blue, represents the American flags, and also is a reminder that all slaves and their descendants were and are Americans. So there's definite thought that was put into it. One thing that I'm not 100% sure was true or not, but because I'm a graphic designer and I love type, the typeface that was added is Myriad, and it is actually a humanist type, which a humanist font represents everyone. So that's an interesting thing about that. That's all.
Right. I hope we learned something new about the flag and why we're flying it on the campus this year. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Ajo. And just a plug, Ajo is a member of the Equality and Equity Project Group. And so just wanted to put a plug in there. If you have not visited that little website, please go ahead and visit that website. And Ajo does all the graphics for that little page. So thank you very much. All right, next up, we're going to also listen to a brief reading by Diane Amelia, another member of the Equality Project Group, and she's going to be doing a brief summary reading on the Juneteenth history.
Yes, ma'am. Let me just pop it up here. So Juneteenth is short for June 19th. And as President Nate said, it marks the day when enslaved people in Texas were finally notified of their freedom, more than 2 months after the end of the Civil War and 2.5 years after signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. So on June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger of the Union Army rode into Galveston, Texas to announce the end of the Civil War and to read something called General Orders Number 3, which began, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection therefore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor." Juneteenth truly marks a second Independence Day in our country. Freed African Americans observed Emancipation Day, as it was first known, as early as just a year later in 1866 in Galveston. And although it has long been celebrated in the African American community, this very monumental event remains largely unknown to most Americans. The historical legacy of Juneteenth shows the value of never giving up hope in uncertain times. And as we know, for the first time this year, Juneteenth is celebrated by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as an official state holiday. So I was going to post a link in the chat, and I think that's only, is that okay? I think that's only going to the moderators. Okay. And this is to a historical summary from the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is accompanied by a wonderful and very powerful picture from an Emancipation Day celebration on June 19, 1900. The end.
All right, thank you, Diane, for that little summary. I hope we're all learning together. That's what we're doing. We're just all learning and reflecting and honoring our past together. So thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to be delighted with a musical or song video presentation. Amanda, you could go ahead and get that going, followed by a moment of silence.
I can breathe. I can breathe. I can breathe.
Yeah, this a revolution in our time. Everybody's fighting change coming, yes. That's why it's an acronym for riot. Everybody has a voice. Don't you dare stay silent. If you say nothing, you are an accessory to violence. Let these words that are tears of our people that are crying. We can bring back hope, but not the people that are dying. It's what happens when the people you've oppressed ask for change in the country that they built, but you've ignored and denied. This is Sandra Bland, George Floyd, and every single family. Police brutality is intervened in and destroyed. Couple bad cops can't define all you other boys. choice. So every good cop needs to stand up and make some noise. Black, white, Asian, doesn't matter because we can't avoid it. So let's all come together, join hands, and just get annoyed at people who believe racism makes sense in a country built up minorities, slaves, work employed. Nobody's born racist, man. It's something you learn, deep rooted in your brain from the day of your birth. I think it's time that we repair all of these bridges we burned and let love out of our hearts onto the cheeks we've turned. Spread love, show love. Let's get rid of this curse. Don't wait for anyone to act. Man, you go first. 400 years wasted. Let's get rid of this hurt, because that's the only way we'll ever see peace on earth.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Change is what we really need. Cut me open, cut you open, res the color every single human being bleeds. Let's come together, cops, citizens, and in between, and rally for the rights of everybody in humanity. Black, blue, white, green, playing for the same team. Mine, I'm okay, but boy, that doesn't mean I can't dream. Black lives matter, shouldn't anger you or make you scream. All lives matter, cause we aren't treated equally. Remember when we were kids and didn't see color, and when we played in kindergarten and I called you my brother. Then we grew up and they taught us we should hate on each other, even though we went in the same and we all came from our mothers. I hope y'all understand. Hate is not a trait, it was learned, man. Equality is the quality we need inside this earth, man. Give and receive is the karma that you earn, man.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Piercing images. That's very reflective of the past year, I think, in the past couple of years. And as we're moving into a moment of silence, Amanda, I'm gonna have you go ahead and do that. Just think about what has been said before. Think about the flag, think about the symbols, what it meant, and what it actually means right now, and what Diane Amelia read about the history and where we are today. Amanda, I'm going to have you go ahead, please.
Thanks, Debbie. You took the words out of my mouth. That's why we're a dynamic duo. At this time, if we could have a minute of moment of silence and reflecting upon the past year and the things we've just learned today. Thank you. I turn it over to Debbie.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Amanda. All righty. So now we're heading into our featured presentation, and this section is going to be featuring our African American staff, faculty members, and we're going to just have a frank and open discussion on Juneteenth and what it really means to them as descendants of slaves who were freed back in 1865. And we're just gonna, just have a very open discussion on what that means for them today. So without further ado, I am going to ask the guests or panelists, and they're going to go ahead and just introduce themselves. And we have 3 wonderful folks here with us. And I'm going to start with Vanessa.
She's gonna call me first, I know.
Of course I am.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
Just give us your name, your role, and how long you've been at North Shore.
Okay. So my name is Vanessa. Hi, everyone. Everyone should know me. Last name Bates. I've worked in TRIO, and I've been at North Shore since 2007 in this role as academic counselor in the TRIO. Part-time and now full-time for 13 years now out of my time that I've been here. So thank you.
All right, awesome. And then we have Professor.
Hi, I'm Troy Smith, if you're referring to me.
Yes, I am.
All right, it's good to be here. And again, Troy Smith, I've been working at North Shore, except for some leave of absence time since 1992. And I teach sociology as well as some interdisciplinary study courses. So glad to be here.
Thank you, Professor Troy. And Nadira.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nadira McDonald. I'm a program director for a program called Gateway to College at North Shore, and I've been in this role for about 4 years. Thank you for being here, and thanks for the space to share.
Okay, thank you. So all 3, we're gonna just have a frank conversation, and audience, you're just gonna listen for a minute. We're going to have a Q&A section, time permitting, towards the end. If there are any comments or questions during this time, you can still send your comments or questions to Andrew, Amanda, and we'll definitely take care of those. But let's start this conversation. So I am glad that you 3 decided and consented to participate in this. So as we have just heard the history, we have just heard the flags and heard about the flag and the colors and the symbols and what they do mean. How do you feel that Juneteenth is now being recognized in American society, and what was it like for you as far as your generation growing up in your family in the society and celebrating Juneteenth, or recognizing it in your family? What was that like? And I'll start with Professor Troy.
All right. So for me, in terms of Juneteenth being acknowledged, I think that's significant. And I think what'll be more significant will be what will we do with it. So, we have holiday, we have a lot of holidays in our society. I think what we do with it and, how are we reflecting, but more importantly, how are we acting on what we know? And I think with the timing of the holiday, for me, I think I see the urgency of action just given all that has been happening the last few years. It's been intense. And so I think that stands out for me. So I think, what happens is still to come. And, so that'll be interesting to see. I don't want it to become sort of the Juneteenth holiday sale that we often see that happens with other
Buy one,
holiday.
get one
So,
free, yeah.
yes. And in terms of growing up with the holiday, I didn't grow up with the holiday. And, for me, my exposure to Juneteenth happened more so as an adult. And this comes from someone who loves his history, who's taught, the history. I feel on some level, I think, holidays as well as what we commemorate is a lot like politics. It's local. It's based on your environment. It's based on your social milieu, your environment, and what comes up. And I can't say that I went to the Juneteenth barbecue with my family or anything like that.
Right.
And I don't know. Interestingly enough, I grew up in New Jersey. Again, exposure to, Malcolm, Martin, and in terms of studying and Black history, went to Africa, but Juneteenth, I learned more about Juneteenth once I came to Massachusetts.
Wow, that's
and
interesting.
I connected with, whether it might have been, I think it might have been people like Claire Jackson and, I want to send a shout out to her, my old colleague in Human Services, who invited me to some social events that happened in Salem, or maybe talking to folks like Minette Law, where, stuff like this would come out a little more so. And I just talking to some other, African-Americans my age who may not have grown up in Texas. And again, not, trying to make this as a generalization, but just a lot of folks that I know about, it wasn't something that came up in conversation. On some level, I wonder if the issue is such a challenging one, or maybe a painful one, that on some level, people might put a little psychological distance to it on some level.
Right, and
Because,
I remember you were also saying that it could be also geographical. You were wondering about the geographical aspect of it. But let me ask Nadira also, because I know they're from different areas. But Nadira and Vanessa, let me ask you the same question, if you don't mind. I'll start with Nadira first.
Okay, so I have both African American and Jamaican heritage.
Oh, do you?
But I grew up with both influences, but I was primarily raised by my mother, who was originally from North Carolina and is a descendant of enslaved Africans in that region. So today, Juneteenth is recognized as a holiday, I think in 47 states. That just happened recently in the US, including Massachusetts, and it's recognized as a celebration of the emancipation of enslaved Africans. However, as was stated, it did originate in Galveston, Texas, where the enslaved people there were sort of the last to be informed.
Right.
And so I think the celebrations were more localized, and over time, the tradition has gained popularity and has spread to cities across the US, in part due to migration that happened. A lot of Blacks after slavery moved to the northern cities where they had more opportunity. And so in my own family, for me, my mother migrated to Boston from North Carolina. And my maiden last name is Hairston. And so the white Hairstons were one of the largest slave owners in the South. They had plantations primarily in North Carolina, and some in Virginia and Mississippi as well. They were of Scottish heritage, and they pronounced the name Harston, whereas the Black Hairstons pronounced Hairston. There was a book that was written, in 1999 by an author named Henry Weinkeck. He actually interviewed the descendants of the white Hairstons and the descendants of the Black Hairstons. So some of my distant relatives are included in that book, and it talks about the history of the slavery in that family from both aspects. And I just feel as though, for me, Juneteenth is a time to pause and reflect on the legacy of slavery in this country and how it's still relevant today. And, you know, for me, I feel like the white Hairston's, what was revealed was that they're still wealthy and benefiting from the generational wealth that they inherited from that time period, while the black Hairston's, despite all that we've accomplished in the face of enslavement, semi-slavery, black codes, Jim Crow, all of that, we're still playing catch up.
Right.
My mother was born before the Civil Rights Act was passed in the 60s, and I'm still a first generation college graduate, a first generation homeowner. And I just feel like the industry of slavery, which isn't talked about often, we talk about the social issues, but the industry of slavery produced a 1,500% return on investment without having the burden of wages, employee benefits, taxes. And to this day, 87% of the nation's economic assets are still frozen in the dominant white society. And according to the Color of Wealth in Boston report that was written in 2015 by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, the median household net worth is about $247,000 for whites and $8, yes, $8 for US non-immigrant Blacks in the city of Boston. When taken into account their assets, they may, we may be working at the same organization and have similar salaries, but when taken into account the generational wealth that was passed down, assets, liabilities, financial resources, personal savings, investment activities, those things, we're still playing catch up on those.
Right.
So, right now, I'm really focused on building a foundation and a legacy for my children and for future generations in my family, and have dedicated my work life to inspiring and empowering other young folks to do the same, so that we continue to grow and progress forward.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Nadira. And Professor Choi, thank you so much for yours too. Yeah, for your information. Wow, this is very interesting. Vanessa?
I don't know if there's much more to say, except for, like, you sit here and you listen, and then you think that you know, but you really don't know. So I'm not one that also has celebrated it traditionally. My family, we've grew up in Boston. My parents are both from Alabama, so that lineage is there. My dad's side of the family is from Livingston, which is a stone's throw away from Meridian, Mississippi, where they had the big freedom fighters and freedom riders and all of that. And they, so if we know our history about Meridian and the freedom fighters, then we know that they killed for them on one of their missions. So we're a stone's throw away from there. My mother's side of the family is from Birmingham, and Pratt City is right outside of Birmingham. And we all know, if we know the history of Birmingham, then we know where the diners, the sit-ins, and all of that other wonderful stuff that went on down there. Not too far from Montgomery either. The next trip to Alabama, it is going to be the Pettus, or the now hopefully renamed Lewis Bridge. We will be doing that journey the next time that we go down there. So that's my heritage in that regard. Family is still prominent in Alabama, but majority of them are here. And so as a culture, for me, as an American Black and descendant as well, we interestingly didn't practice it. And maybe, as Troy was mentioning earlier, maybe it's because of the regionalism of where we are. But I find here in Massachusetts that there is a lot of history that is amnesiaed, so to speak, that we don't really acknowledge a lot of things, including the fact that one of the first slaves that came upon the shores actually came to Massachusetts. And then the abolitionist movement started working towards getting the freedom, because slaves themselves started speaking up about their own freedom and their own rights. And so Massachusetts, on the Vineyard, on Nantucket, they have a strong history of slavery here. But for my family, looking at the overall context of Juneteenth, we primarily looked at it in terms of, it wasn't something that we really celebrated per se. But what we did celebrate was Family Day, which was Kite Festival up at Franklin Park. We also did Jubilee, and I believe that's the day before the Caribbean Festival that's been going on for the last, I think they're 25 or 32 years now strong. So the night before, there would be a lot of festive activities, again, up at Franklin Park. So that primarily was a center of activity for my family in terms of looking at that cultural heritage, because we did the Caribbean heritage as well as the African heritage. But looking at it from the Juneteenth perspective, I think there's still a shame and stigma attached to it. So I think for me, that's why there probably wasn't a lot of history with that. And as we get older and as we've learned about ourselves and a lot about this American history and American culture and the negativity with America around slavery, I think that's something that's been kind of overshadowed for me to be able to really truly celebrate emancipation. And I know that this weekend, the African Meeting House, I believe it is going to have the documents on display around America, Massachusetts, and emancipation of slavery, then the Galveston emancipation, and also the emancipation written by Abraham Lincoln. So all three of those documents are going to be on display, which is still interesting that, as Nadira highlighted, the long sordid history is still impacting us economically today. So it's kind of like heart heavy to have this discussion, but then look at all of the successes of ancestry in terms of being able to survive and live, but then see generations still struggling. So it's very heavy.
Right. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to actually lead Troy into that because Vanessa and Nadira, and Troy, you touched on it a little bit because I was thinking of emancipation and what it means. And it means freedom, liberation from all types of oppression and all forms of, slavery, oppression. And just a side note, I'm identified as Black in American society, but I'm originally from the British West Indies, which actually got its emancipation 1834. All right, that was the Emancipation Proclamation was 1834. In America, it's 1863. And then in Galveston, as we learned with the Juneteenth, why we have the celebration, they didn't hear about it until 2 years later. So sounds like America is, catching up. Well, it's kind of catching up with the rest of the world in a sense when it comes to freedom, when it comes to liberation. So let me ask this question, and Troy, I know you wanted to speak on this, so you wanted to speak, but you can also answer this then. As we talked about that, as we talked about what it means as far as Juneteenth and the impact it has on the society today, do you think emancipation itself is realized in today's society? Does this proclamation ring true in all aspects of our society? I'm thinking of Bob Marley, chapter 1, verse 1, when he says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. You could get that book if you want. None but ourselves can free our minds. Talk a little bit about that as descendants.
Well, in looking at it, I look at it also from a global perspective, because I think, we can sometimes get, a little caught up in who got their liberation first, who's freer, when in reality, we have a system that operates where, people are disempowered all over the world. So, if we're talking about liberation, liberation would mean the ability for self-determination, the ability to control your own economic resources. And I think that becomes, sort of the real measurement in this society, in a society where, other nations where people can get loans, international loans and still be in debt. And, if that's the case, Haiti should not have the issues that it has, given its legacy in terms of freedom and overthrowing, French colonial rule. So I think we do have to look at this, from a worldwide perspective and recognize that, that there needs to be some type of collective acknowledgement and connection to each other, because sometimes we don't even want to acknowledge
Absolutely.
our common connections. We'll find differences based on accents, based on skin color, based on hair texture. So, if we're going to talk about divisions, let's look at some of those, within the Black community worldwide.
Right.
In terms of emancipation locally, or let's say in the United States, and I kind of share some of the, sentiment that Vanessa shared earlier, that it's a real paradox in terms of, sort of acknowledging this, but also what are the struggles that still remain. So if we talk about the 13th Amendment and, the idea of people being free unless, one is incarcerated, where we leave that as a loophole. And then we look at the issue of mass incarceration, where there are so many, Black people disproportionately in the criminal justice system, when that was not the calculus before, how things have shifted. So I think, if we look at emancipation, we have to look at it broadly. We also have to be able to acknowledge instances where Black people have been able to amass wealth, to be empowered, but then to have it destroyed, like Tulsa, Oklahoma. So, I mean, we converge at this time, where that's being acknowledged.
And Apopka, Florida.
So that's a lot to unpack, but I think, we have to be able to look at the internal healing that needs to happen, as well as being able to have a conversation about reparations, to get that on the table, because that sometimes becomes a taboo discussion. We don't want to talk about that. But when we're talking about an instance where generational wealth was able to be made, from slavery, then, that's a lot. And, whatever that check would be, maybe the country's afraid that it'll bankrupt it. But, the reality is, if, in one of my Martin and Malcolm classes, there was a debate that you can't have justice on stolen land. So, it's interesting to sort of look at how do we, achieve justice. So I think there's two sides to that. And I think, there has to be a plan to not just talk about diversity, not just talk about equality, but how do you really do it? And also, how do you confront issues around power?
Right.
You got to be able to take on the issue of power as well. And that's, one of the areas that we don't talk about as openly. How do you share power, or, how do you open that up? As Frederick Douglass says, power concedes nothing without demand. It never has, and it never will. So, how do we get to that point?
Right. Thank you very much. And thank you for pointing out it is a global issue, in the sense of colonialism is still an issue. Emancipate, you might be free, but there's still aspects of oppression all over the world in different countries, not just in America. Nadira?
So everything that Troy said, I definitely agree with. And I don't know, it's an emotional issue. It brings up feelings of sadness and anger for what my ancestors had to endure. But at the same time, it also brings a sense of pride and purpose, because
Right.
I feel that even though all the things that were done to try to keep them down, we're still here, and we're still going to be here. And so I look at, we look at Tulsa, but Tulsa was one situation and it's popularized because of the massacre.
Right,
But
right.
there were Tulsas throughout the country.
Lots.
In spite of the years of oppression after slavery, we had Black banks, we developed our own colleges, schools, libraries. We had cities that were established by Black descendants of slaves in this country. And so we can continue to do that. But when we think about now, like, why is it that that doesn't exist anymore? I grew up in the city of Boston, which during that time was predominant in the neighborhood of Dorchester, which was predominantly a Black neighborhood at that time. And all I saw was stores. All the stores that we went to were owned by other people of other ethnicities, not non-immigrant Blacks. We were buying products, and I always wondered, even as a kid, like, why we're going to this store, we're buying this product, and why are we investing in other people's wealth and not generating it for ourselves? And so, that was something that I tried to make sense of. And in school, in high school, we were never taught any of this. The history that we were taught as far as when it came to Black American history was just slavery and the civil rights movement, as if there were no other contribution to this country, when we really kind of impacted every single area that you can think of as far as industries. And so for me, I don't think that we are fully emancipated. I think that we are still recovering from it. And I think the more that we can have frank conversations and actually speak the truth, then we can maybe get somewhere.
Very, very powerful. Thank you, Nadira, for that. Vanessa, you want to add, please?
Yeah. And I'll just add on briefly what Nadira said, that kind of springboards into talking about the post-traumatic stress syndrome of slavery. And it really is glaring, because it goes back to that connect. I was looking at last night a documentary, and on it, it said 1865, chattel slavery ended, with the Galveston announcement. And then Jim Crow was around to 1964. So we went from one institution to another. So I can talk about the sharecropping and the other things that my family did ancestrally, because they're from Alabama. We all talk about our history, but I can actually trace my lineage. My grandmother, her mother, biracial, she's Choctaw Indian, so I could trace my territory. And I appreciate Diane putting up that map as well. It's like, click on here to see where your territory and where your lineage is for Indigenous people.
Just a plug, everybody, please. You could go to the Equality Project page and check that out. Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead.
And so I think about all of that. And then I think about, like Troy was mentioning in his comments about the Civil War. The Civil War was, for all intents and purposes, around slavery. And then so all of this Juneteenth now really makes a difference, because we were fighting for freedom, fighting for liberation, fighting for this. But if we look at the Emancipation and we talk about the Declaration of Independence, you can read in between liberty and freedom, but just not for you. But yet the acknowledgement of this situation that we have in this country around the flag, and people saying that you're not patriotic because you didn't kneel. And so you think about Kaepernick, and you think about all of the other social justice movements, and realistically, this horrifying last 5 years that we've had, and I will include our previous past president in that horrifying situation, that whoever voted, that's fine. But, looking at that history, all of this has to do with that oppression. And so going back to those initial comments, that I feel like I don't feel like I'm seen. I still feel like I'm an invisible person, that out of all of the oppressed people that we've had in this world and in this country, Black people are still disrespected and disregarded, no matter what the achievement and accomplishment is. And it's really just kind of like hard to digest when you really think about systemically, psychologically, the victimization of everything. And now we have voting laws still being repealed and going back and still trying to take away rights away from people. It's just bothersome on all different kinds of levels. So it just brings me just to a place where, you know, like Nadira said, you're appreciative. My mom, even though they were married, they got divorced. My mom worked 2 jobs to make sure that we got the things that we needed. And when you think about things like that as a child, I know that we weren't sleeping on dusty floors and, you know, sleeping on cardboard, but we had our things that we needed. And then when somebody asks a question like, oh, do you think you were poor? Like, what's poor? Like, how would I know if I was poor when I had, you know, everything it is that I wanted, but we didn't have a lot of material possessions. And so that kind of makes you look at things differently. Other people make you feel differently about yourself than you feel about yourself. And I think bringing that full circle to what Nadira is saying in terms of learning about education, like Troy said, you don't learn these things when you're in grade school. You learn these things as adults. But I know when I'm being oppressed and I know when I'm being treated differently, that I can say, I do know what that feels like.
Wow.
So.
Thank you. Thank you. Very powerful. We're winding down. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to have each of you give some final thoughts. But in your final thoughts, if you can just include, what is it you'd like North Shore Community College, the community itself, to know, to understand about Juneteenth, especially from the African-American perspective? And moving forward, what are some of the things that folks should reflect on? And as we continue to incorporate a lot of diversity issues into this community, and we're expanding our learning and our understanding, what is it about Juneteenth, when folks are reflecting on this, that they should keep in their minds and make it a priority, and, you know, include that, include Juneteenth into their way of life? I'll start with Nadira, if you don't mind. I'll do a round robin.
So as someone who's still learning about Juneteenth, I guess how it resonates with me is just pause and reflect on and acknowledge the fact that this is a part of our collective history, and that there are opportunities for us to make things better. I mean, especially in a community college that is based on full access and community, find ways to make sure that students are better off when they leave North Shore Community College than when they came in. There's a phenomenon where a lot of students they're sold a dream that if you go to college, you'll bring yourself up out of poverty. But then a lot of times students take out, you know, a lot of loan debt. And then if they don't finish college, then they're worse off than when they started. So I want to make sure that we are keeping in mind that we have an opportunity and an obligation really to help students to access economic mobility. And we're in a very unique position to be able to do that, I think. And so thinking about that as we work with students and seeing their potential and making sure that they're accessing the programs that will generate a livable wage and that they're not left out due to, you know, not being able to meet certain standards or not being informed of the standards that they have to meet. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it there. And I think some of our practices, such as, and this is more of a national federal thing, I think this satisfactory academic progress program I think it does inhibit students, because if they're not successful, if they were underprepared in their high school due to no fault of their own, it penalizes them if they're not successful here. And if we're not providing the supports that they need to be successful, how are we setting that student up for success if they're being denied financial aid to continue on in college? So just, I think in terms of policy, just think about the ways in which we are helping students versus just providing access.
Nadira and Stephen, that's in the midst of changing right now. So,
I'm sorry, 1 second, Stephen.
sorry, I just want
yeah.
to make sure she knew that.
No, we're going to have question and answer
Okay,
at the
good.
end, if you
Sorry.
don't mind. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Nadira. I was also, you spoke on the students, but do you mind just giving very briefly as far as, you know, employees, faculty and staff, the perspective on that as far as North Shore Community College also looking and understanding the diversity population, the employee population. I'm always saying 15 to 20% of us, diverse people of color here on this campus. And that's something that really needs to be, you know, it needs to be more, you know, it needs to be in the forefront. People need to understand what that percentage also does mean. So Nadira, I know you just spoke on the students, but just give me a little bit on that, if you don't mind. And then Vanessa, I'll go to you.
I feel just taking into account the voices of employees like myself, and not just being so stringent about the policies and the established ways of doing things that we miss opportunities to provide more access. So I think, as for me as an employee, I work here because I am dedicated to the students. So I know that a lot of what I'm saying is focused on that, but that's truly the reason why I'm in this. And so I feel like feeling heard and actually having my viewpoints taken into account in decision making, having a seat at the table is really important to me. And so I think just continuing to take into account our voices.
Thank you so much. And then Vanessa, briefly, if you can.
Yes, I will say overtly and covertly, there's a lot of racism, and that is something that needs to be dealt with. We do a lot of things where we check off, and as much as I don't appreciate threefold this past year with the murder of Mr. Floyd, because previous murders have happened before and nothing was ever done about it. But I do appreciate the fact that it put a national spotlight on mental health. It put a national spotlight on racism. It put a national spotlight on the need and the necessity for more equity and equality, as Nadira has been pointed out. We look at our campus, and Debbie, you mentioned 15 to 20%. When I think of the Black identified employees, because we have employees that I don't identify as Black, that they may look Black, but they'll say, I'm Haitian, or I'm this, or I'm that. I look at, and I'm calling Jennifer out because she's here, as for a long time being the only Black female person that we had in behavioral sciences. I think about Troy, I think about myself, Kia, you. There's only a handful of us in that regard on this campus. So when we hire, we need to look at how wide we cast our net and not just on little things. We need to diversify the campus, because we have students that are looking around and say, I see no one like myself. So that's another reason why students may be leaving the campus, in addition to some of the other changes that we are making. But I really want us to really be honest about where we are as an institution and looking at our long history, and to have such a great history and still only have such a small number of employees of color. That's telling. And to still walk these hallways and still see not many, and I said this in other meetings, which is not something that if you haven't been there, you haven't been able to see. Nadira now is the only mid-level manager now that Diane Dickerson, my director, retired. Bonnie is the next high-level manager. We have no deans that are of color in that regard in this institution. So it's very telling.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Troy.
For me, the thing that inspired me to want to teach at a community college, which happened years ago, was my mother, who had migrated along with my grandmother, uncle, and grandpa from North Carolina. And, growing up, I saw my mom work 2 full-time jobs while going to school. And she started off at a community college and went on to a 4-year school in New Jersey, graduated, distinguished. That for me was the example. And when I saw what her experience was like at the community college, I loved the energy of the community college. I loved the diversity of the community college. So long ago, I knew that I wanted to be in a community college. And, that's why North Shore has been my work home, for all of these years. I've seen a lot of transitions during the time that I've been here. Even going back to the early years, I've seen things that have worked that, maybe not necessarily because of the college, but because of national trends that have impacted us. I remember seeing successful programs like the Project, Interlock, the engineering program, where, minority students were getting into schools like WPI, NJIT, going to top engineering schools. But, during the time when they had the cutbacks or, they were trying to roll back race-based, quote unquote, programs during the first George Bush era, I saw a great program, dismantled for whatever reasons. There may be internal reasons that I may not know about, but all I want to say is that students see that. We got to be able to stand strong on what our principles are. And I feel in a lot of ways, this year we're seeing a lot of good initiatives. So that's very hopeful. But, and I'll go to a quote that I remember one of my, old deans, I don't know if he came up with the quote, but Tom Wisby, said, make diversity a value, not an issue. That statement has always stood with me. So I think how we, bring about the issue of diversity is important, how we engage it. And the fact that, we're doing these things, that is very hopeful, but, we have to also be able to be able to challenge what the national trends are. Just because the trends go a certain way doesn't mean that we have to go that way, and that we have to be able to stand firm with what we believe in and to really make North Shore the unique place that it is, to be able to foster it, to be able to build upon those strengths. So, to me, that's what's important. Be able to create pathways where, people of color, in a wide range of positions have a pathway to know that there's something else to head on to, maybe mentor that person. How about that? What are some things that we can do to sort of share? If there's information, if there are things that could help people, to advance and to become the best that they can be, and I have to say, I felt some of that in recent years in terms of being able to get, some opportunities to move forward in some things, but we have to keep that going, and we have to be proactive, and we have to be willing to speak truth to power, no matter who we are, and to be able to find ways to be mutual allies. Because a lot of times in society, we tend to fight for crumbs when, there's a whole big piece of the pie, and, we get caught up in pettiness, so, I just want to see our society move forward, but I also want to see us to, continue to move forward and to also to expand. And for all those of you who are doing that work, I know there are folks out there who are doing this on a regular basis. We appreciate you, and I'm glad to be an ally, and just hope that we can continue to move forward. And I think today was a positive day for us to have such a frank conversation. So
And
that's
Troy,
appreciated.
you touched on something, and I just noticed that President
Quickly,
Nate
quickly, Vanessa.
I will do it quickly, that I noticed that President Nate popped out, and I don't think, for me, as an employee that's been here for the past 14, 15 years, that had we not had Nate this past year, I don't know what this institution would be like. So I just wanted to publicly thank him for all of the work and effort that he's done as well. But he popped out before I could say that, but I wanted to give him that acknowledgement.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my goodness, this was amazing. Thank you, Professor Choi, Vanessa, Indira, and the audience. I hope we all learned something today. I know I did, something new from our very own folks, part of the community here. And hopefully we all learned something new about Juneteenth. I know I did. As I said before, Juneteenth wasn't part of my culture. But obviously, being here, I learned about it. And being identified as a Black individual here, I learned a lot about it, and I connected with the African American culture. And just to hear the specifics and the details and the intimacy from their perspective today was really, really wonderful to hear. So we're going to just open up. We have a couple of minutes, and we're definitely going to open up for questions, Q&A, discussion. I know, Stephen, if you wanted to go ahead, I think you wanted to respond to something that
just
Nadira
quickly,
mentioned.
Ever so quickly, that is everything that Nadira said is true, and that financial aid policy was limiting. And what's great news is that a staff member came on board who got certified in satisfactory academic progress and financial aid, and she started reaching out to other schools within the Mass Community College system and doing some research on the regulations, and she saw the opportunity to recommend to Susan and hence to me and Christine if she was here, but she just got here, so not to Christine at the moment she was here, but to make changes to it. So we are going to amend the policy and allow for students to have more opportunities to regain their financial aid. So that should support all of our students, but particularly we know it should support our BIPOC population as well. So we're excited for that, and the staff is engaged in that work now. And I know, Nadira, you didn't know about it, and I'm sorry about that. I think they just started getting around, and they may have made it to a couple of the bigger teams, but they probably didn't think to connect with you. So I'm hoping you can connect with Deirdre. She's really passionate about, giving students the opportunities to continue to learn. And so we're excited. It's a good thing. It's progress.
All right. Okay. So while we're yet speaking, things are happening. All right. Thank you very much, Stephen. Anybody else? Just open up. So questions, comments for the panelists or anyone? You can unmute. Thoughts?
I have one little thing that I learned, and I will absolutely confess to not being a A+ history student, but as I was growing up, I thought the Emancipation Proclamation, I was taught it freed the slaves, but it didn't everywhere. It was only in the Confederate States. I didn't know until like last week that was the case. And I don't know if that was just a gap in my learning, but that certainly wasn't something that I was brought up knowing. I thought it was much more expansive, but that tells me that even with that document, there was so much more to be done. Didn't even take into account the states where we live right now.
Right. Wow. Thank you, Diane. How many of us have really heard about Juneteenth before last year, 2020? Have. Okay. That's a show of hands. Right.
Yes.
It hasn't been something that's very, very, very popular, but yes, it is becoming more popular, and I'm really hoping that it will reach, where the stage where it becomes a national holiday, not just state holiday. Ray, you had something you wanted to?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But
All
do you
right.
know,
And
Debbie, also,
yes.
I wanted to also mention, we've had over this past year, and we kind of been talking about it today, in terms of historical aspect of, well, slavery is real, it happened. This is something that, as Troy was outlining earlier, that we just have to get over with in this country and deal with our ugly history, which is why the riots were able to happen in January at the Capitol. Someone said something to me the other day, and I had to basically really take a deep breath, which goes back to something that Nadira said. The struggle is a constant struggle, and we're always fighting to be seen and to be heard. But we also have to, as you said earlier in the beginning, deal with implicit bias, microaggressions. I have a button that says Black Minds and Lives Matter. So I heard somebody say something, like a whisper. This is also a time where Asian hate is going on. So there's a big thing on the train that, I take the T. So, there's a whole big movement going on in lots of different communities and cultures. And somebody goes, well, what makes you so special? And so it took all of everything not to just turn around and do that quote unquote Black woman, turn my head to the side and we're like, what are you talking, give an attitude. And I just basically had to say, because of comments like that, that's why it matters. And the ignorance, which is why I said earlier, the overt and covert racism, people just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to listen to it. They don't want to know about it. And this is something that is in the underbelly of this country. From the beginning, there's no deniability about it, but how people look at it and how they bring it in makes all the difference in the world. So going back to the question that you asked us to kind of summarize with, as Nadira was saying, Troy said, and we've been talking about it in terms of allyship, it boggles my mind that you can't do anything to make something happen unless collectively a lot of people get together. So even if Shirley Chisholm, you don't make room for me at the table, I can bring my own chair, but in bringing my own chair, are you really gonna make room for me, or I'm gonna have to sit in the corner? It really is a hardship. And I don't think that people really understand that. So for me, Juneteenth, slavery, being Black in America, being a woman, being a Black woman, it's so layered and it's so heavy in my very existence on a day-to-day basis is abrased in so many ways that it's just like you come to work, you try to be joyous, you're there for your students, but then where is my allyship? Where do I go? Whom can I talk to? And so that burden of self-discovery and rediscovery, it's a constancy. And I don't think that nobody really understands that. Some people, they really don't care. But for those that do come to the table, as Troy said, we really do appreciate that camaraderie, and we have to kumbaya and really stand tall and stand together in order to make and affect change. I think about something that Amanda said, and I'll be quiet as we wrap up, about going for a jog after Ahmaud Arbery was murdered and realizing she's out jogging, and that freedom to just be able to be free to run. That's not always been the case for Brown people. And so that struggle is real.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Wow. Wow, very impactful. I think if there are no other questions or comments, anybody else? Okay, so Andrew, I think I'm going to turn this over back to you for wrapping up, but I just want to say that this conversation has been very, very enlightening, very transparent, and thank you for your vulnerability, each of you. And I know for me, I'm going to be reflecting on some of the things that you all have shared, and I hope each of us, we are going to be doing that too. So thank you once again, audience. Thank you for being here. And Andrew, please.
Yeah, thank you. So, thank you all for coming and holding space with us today. I think these conversations are conversations that happen in pockets at the community, and not necessarily across the community as a whole. So we really want to, I'm saying we, myself and my fellow co-conspirators from the Anti-Racism Working Group really want to bring these conversations out into our community, and really get us to a place where we're more comfortable talking about these things, where we're more comfortable contending with our history, and then working collectively towards our future, and understanding what that all looks like. So, I will add, a big part of what we had hoped to do today, were we in person and not, disparate and spread across, Massachusetts, multiple campuses, et cetera, would be to raise the Juneteenth flags on both of our campuses. So while this was taking place, those flags went up. I'll be sending you all an email with a couple of photos. They're not, they're photos. It's not a super windy day, so bear with me, please. But next time you're on campus, make sure you look up at those flags, and you'll see the Juneteenth flag flying for the very first time over the North Shore campus. It'll be up through the end of next week. So take a look, and really thank you all for being here today. We recorded this, so we will look to post it up on the EEP site. If y'all don't know where that is, let me know, and I'm happy to navigate you there. I will also include a link along with the photos, okay? So thank you all so much for your time, for joining us on a Tuesday afternoon. We appreciate it. We hope you all have a blessed rest of the day.
Thank you.
Just a moment. Joy and Vanessa and Nadira, could you hang on for a bit, please? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.